This incident happened to me when I was working as a security guard for a private Massachusetts beachside community in 1997. It was the first weekend after Labor Day, and a good number of owners had begun or already closed up shop and went home for the season. There was still a steady trickle of people renting, and it would remain like that at least through September. But for the most part, things were relatively quiet around this time of the year. The actual complex bordered a quarter-mile stretch of beach. It consisted of three multi-storied buildings that each housed a few dozen condominium units, along with a few avenues of conjoined townhomes and detached residents. There are a couple of pools and other recreational areas for the kids, while most of the adults would park themselves at the beach. Most residents were elderly couples and families, but there are a few cliques of younger kids that roamed around during the day and night, whose ages ranged anywhere from 9 or 10, and some in their mid 20s. You had your select younger residents or renters that were more troublesome than others. Anyone under 18 had to return to their condos or houses when quiet hours started, which was 11 p.m. Most of the college age kids weren't too problematic, and they were primarily looking for somewhere to drink or smoke, which we tolerated as long as they weren't too loud. Around this time of year, a lot of them had already returned home to school, and with the exception of those whose institutions were nearby or lived close enough to still come down on weekends. It was a weekend night, a little past 1 in the morning, and there were only three of us working. Aside from making our usual rounds and asking a small group of 20 somethings that were drinking by one of the pools to relocate to the beach, it was shaping up to be a relatively uneventful night. We were all hanging out in a little gatehouse at the community's main entrance when the camera feed monitoring the North Trail to the beach went black. I volunteered to investigate the matter and took one of the golf carts that we shared with the complex's maintenance team. The complex's pools and residential section were separated from the beach by a stretch of trees and dense shrubbery about 4 acres wide. Three pathways cut through this patch of thicket and connected to the rest of the complex from the beach, which were simply known as the North, Center, and South Trails. The North Trail was the longest and most secluded out of the three, especially since part of it technically cut through wildlife management area that bordered with the complex. From the gatehouse, the drive to the North Trail took about 3 minutes. The trail started at the northeast corner of the complex, which consisted of a parking lot for the residents, a row of storage sheds, and a small sitting area with some grills and a fire pit. When I arrived, it appeared darker than usual, which was when I realized only three of the 9 street lamps within the parking lot were lit. I quickly noticed some movement by a bench near the North Trail entrance and caught the parting trails of two teenagers as they scurried into the wall of darkness, making the pathway's edge. I caught a light whiff of marijuana in the breeze coming from the direction of the beach and shook my head as a light chuckle escaped my lips. Probably would have just told you to take it to the beach anyways, I muttered under my breath while walking toward the storage shed. Glancing back up at the street lamps, I wondered if the camera's feed going out was part of a bigger power related issue as I approached the panel board that was embedded in the white painted concrete wall separating the parking lot and start of the underbrush. An initial inspection revealed no switches had been tampered with for both the cameras and the street lamps. Resetting the power, I turned the switches for the security camera and street lights off and flipped them back on after 2 or 3 seconds. To my satisfaction, all 9 street lamps were lit again. Making a smirky smile at my accomplishment, I retrieved my radio as I pridefully surveyed the rest of the parking lot. "How's the feed looking now?" I asked the other two guards at the gatehouse. "Still nothing, Tex," Bill, our supervisor, said in a crackly, static filled reply. "Take a ride down to the platform, see if there's anything wrong with the actual camera itself. There should be a way to manually reset it on the camera, like a button or something. If that doesn't work, we'll have maintenance look at it in the morning." "Okay, I'll radio you when I'm there," I replied, after which I released a long, huffy sigh. Putting my radio back into its belt clip, I closed the panel board and got back into the golf cart. I've been down the North Trail by myself at night, and I'll admit it is pretty creepy. I got back into the golf cart and started driving down the wooden trail. None of the three pathways had any lighting along them until you reached the wooden platforms on the beach. It instantly became dark, leaving me to rely on the golf cart's headlights as my only light source. After seeing two stoners flee down the path and remembering the group of kids that we told to go to the beach, I was expecting other people to be at the platform when I arrived. Granted, the North Trail wasn't used as often, and in a relatively secluded section of the complex, it made for a popular drinking and smoking spot. These thoughts were on my mind as I rolled down the trail. Feeling the radio clip on my belt shift, I looked down to adjust it, while trying to manage the golf cart down a curve the pathway made with the other hand. Upon looking back up, my eyes widened and I slammed on the brakes, bringing the golf cart to a harsh but instant halt. Standing in the middle of the trail was a young looking girl wearing a white camisole dress. The first thing I noticed was her dress was covered in light brown patches of sand and dirt. Her skin was noticeably pale, and she had two large sunken green eyes surrounded by slightly darkened circles. Her dark brown hair appeared choppy and ragged looking, but was tied in a bun with clumps of sand and dirt caught within the strands. She must have been no older than 15 or 16. She had very frail looking limbs. She was barefoot and appeared to be in a daze. Right away, I could tell she had to have been intoxicated or on some sort of drug. Readjusting myself in the driver's seat, I took a slow, deep breath while I stared at the girl and waited for her to move. At first, she did nothing and continued gazing straight ahead. It looked like she was staring directly at me, but I could quickly tell she was really staring out into space and didn't appear fazed by my unprecedented appearance. Sorry, I didn't see you there, I finally said after a few brief moments of silence. Do you have your residence band? Residence bands were wristbands that residents and renters wore to indicate that they were staying at the complex. Before she could respond, I quickly swept over the girl's wrists and ankles with my eyes and didn't see her wearing one. Being that it was past peak season, however, we were pretty lax on this rule, so I decided to let it slide. The girl didn't respond and wore a mournful expression on her face, like something troublesome dominated her train of thought. Do you live here? I asked, which seemed to get a reaction out of the girl's eyes, flashing back to life, and she lightly adjusted her head to face me. She didn't say anything and vertically shook her head. I shuddered to imagine how impaired this girl must have truly been as I looked her over for the second time. Part of me wanted to resume driving, but I did feel a little sorry for her, and I could tell something upsetting had happened to her that night. Can you take me home? The girl asked. Her unexpected question kind of made me jump a little. The golf cart had two rows of back seats. We technically weren't supposed to transport residents, but usually made exceptions for some of the community's elderly residents and occasional drunkards struggling to make their way back every once in a blue moon. While something was clearly off about this girl, I found myself rigidly nodding my head, indicating the girl could catch a ride with me. I just have to make a quick stop at the platform, but can take you back right after, if you don't mind coming for a little bit of a ride, I told the girl as she slowly shuffled towards a golf cart and climbed into the back. Where's your unit? It's not far, the girl whispered in a sullen, wistful tone, hanging her head like she was staring down at her feet. Are there any people at the platform right now? I asked as I resumed driving, going slower than I initially was in case I encountered anyone else walking back from the beach. The girl didn't respond and continued hanging her head. Pursing my lips, I figured she must not have been in much of a talking mood and kept my eyes fixed on the trail. My sluggish speed, along with the growing unease emanating off the strange girl sitting behind me, was making the drive feel like it was lasting an eternity. I completed about three quarters of the drive and was in the more sequestered section of the pathway that briefly cut through the wildlife management area. I caught my first glimpses of the platform's light when the girl's voice rang out and shattered the silence that consumed our ride. Stop! The girl demanded in a quick, firm tone, prompting me to bring the golf cart to an abrupt stop. What's the matter? I asked the girl, who didn't say anything at first and slowly extended her left arm to point towards the trees. I'm here. Before I could respond, the girl stood up, stepped out of the golf cart, and started walking off the path towards the underbrush. Wait, what? Where are you going? I asked with slight concern and confusion. partly stepping out of the golf cart while the girl started to casually walk towards the thicket. Stopping, the girl didn't turn and continued staring straight ahead. "It's okay, Erwin's coming soon," she uttered in the same dismally humbling tone that contained a slight hint of hope. Perplexed by her response, I paused for a moment, unsure how to exactly respond. The girl continued walking into the trees and underbrush, knowing I couldn't let her go by herself. I quickly hopped out of the golf cart and caught up to her in a few lunge-like steps, quickly reaching out and placing my hand on her shoulder. "Wait, can you hold up a second?" I stammered as my grip tightened on her shoulder, after which the girl finally stopped. "You can't be wandering out here in your condition. I'll turn the cart around right now and take you home. Just tell me where your unit is." I was cut short as I gestured for the girl to turn around. When she did, I was completely paralyzed by what I saw. The girl's skin was now mottled in a sickly light gray color, her white dress completely ragged and covered with brown and dark red stains. The worst part about what I saw, that still sticks with me after all these years, the girl's face was completely missing. It was a dark, gaping void, like her entire face had been torn off her head. She stood completely still at first, but then slowly canted her head, during which a squishy, crackling sound rang out in conjunction with her shifting neck muscles. Screaming loudly, I scrambled back to the golf cart, threw it in reverse, and attempted to make a K turn, backing into trees in the process. Still seeing this faceless girl in my peripherals, I wasn't even fazed by the crash I had hastily completed by the maneuver and sped down the pathway toward the complex. My heart was pounding, stomach churning, and I was taking short, frantic breaths, feeling like I'd lost complete control of my body. All I could do was keep my foot pressed on the golf cart's accelerators and my eyes fixed on the road ahead of me until I burst out into the pathway back into the parking lot. I maintained my speed while I headed back to the gatehouse, and even ignored the call on the radio from Bill, who angrily asked why I was driving so fast after seeing me on one of the cameras. I was hysterical upon returning, unable to make out words. I was sweating heavily and needed a few moments to catch my breath, although I didn't even run. Bill and the other guards began frantically asking me what was wrong and what happened to the back of the golf cart. All I could utter before finally calming down was that I saw something. When I finally calmed down, I told my two coworkers what had happened and outright refused to return to the North Trail. I could tell they were skeptical, and Bill even proposed I must have been the brunt of a sick joke played by one of the more mischievous younger residents, but could tell I was really shaken up. He agreed to have maintenance check on the camera in the morning and let me spend the rest of my shift in the gatehouse before letting me leave early. I spent the next week completely avoiding the North Trail and was even apprehensive about going anywhere alone in the complex at night. I refused to discuss what I saw any further, despite the other guards teasing me because they all thought I had been the butt end of a perfectly executed prank. About 10 days later, during one of my shifts, we received a complaint that an unreleased dog had been seen entering the North Trail, which they weren't even allowed to go down by in the first place, so I had no choice but to investigate. Fortunately, Bill was also working that day and agreed to come with me. To my dismay, we found the dog at the exact spot where the girl had gotten out of the golf cart that night. It was a German Shepherd and had been frantically barking, whining, and scratching at the ground a few feet into the thicket in between two oak trees. There was another man at the scene whom I recognized as one of the complex's residents and recalled he was a recently retired police officer. Upon our arrival, he eagerly walked up to us with great concern across his face. "Sorry about the dog," he said quickly. "I just adopted him. He was part of our canine unit." And the man's voice trailed off as he looked back at the dog, who seemed fixated on one particular spot as it continued to scratch the ground with its front paws. "Well, I'll be blunt with you. He used to be a cadaver dog, and he always acted like this whenever he thinks he's got a hit." Bill and I looked at each other before turning back to the man and squinting in confusion. My blood ran cold when the man continued talking. "I think he smells a dead body, and I think you ought to call the police to investigate. After consulting with the community's general manager, he reluctantly agreed to have us call. My guess, he wouldn't have if this had happened during peak season and may have tried to dismiss the matter. It took longer than expected for the police to arrive, mainly because a particular spot in question was technically part of wildlife management area property, so we initially had to notify the Department of Fish and Wildlife who managed the land. When the area was excavated, the authorities did in fact uncover skeletal remains. I was helping with cordoning off the area while the forensic team worked and was deeply unnerved when I saw the skull they exhumed was missing all of the facial features. I later learned the body was determined to be that of a girl in her mid to late teens who had been dead for about 30 years, long before the complex was even built. I later read in the paper that she must have died around the same time a local 15-year-old girl who went missing, whose case was unsolved. On the day of the excavation, while the forensic team was extracting the bones, I overheard one of the CSIs speaking with a man whose dog had sniffed out the grave. The investigator asked what was his dog's name, and it was the man's response that still gives me shivers to this day: Ewing. I always hated the drive back home from Columbus. It was long. It took over 3 hours to get there. The drive only consisted of about 20 miles of highway, and the rest was a straight shot through the heart of rural America. The drive itself was actually a lovely ride, past lots of farm, land, nature. The only problem was at night it was very dark and a bit hard to navigate, but it really doesn't bother me. What bothered me was the radio station. There's only one radio station that came in once you hit that road, and it was not the most fun to listen to. It played nothing but traditional folk music that sounded like it had been recorded through a tin can. I mean, this shit was dated, probably recorded even before my grandparents were born. My car was old, nearly as old as I am. It only had AM FM radio, so this meant I was stuck listening to songs about June bugs played through banjos or whatever for nearly an hour. I had just reached the road when my radio static came in, so I hit the seek button, and sure enough, I heard the familiar sound of old timey music from the days before a woman could vote through the radio station. I sighed. It's going to be a long hour. After about 10 minutes, I began to get frustrated with the station. I began contemplating turning off the radio, but I'd rather hear this than the awful sound my old car makes for the next hour. So I hit the seek button, knowing full well I wouldn't find anything else to listen to. I tried this many times before, never had any luck, but I figured it was worth a shot. You can imagine my surprise when another station actually came through. I was so relieved, ready to listen to anything else. You're listening to 92.1 The Vibe. We play what you want to hear, the cheesy, stereotypical sounding DJ said as the intro to Hall and Oates' Rich Girl began playing. Fantastic, one of my favorite songs was playing on the radio. I cranked it up and was singing along in my typical tone deaf style, loving every second of it. The station continued to play bop after bop. Outkast's Hey Ya, Billy Joel's Piano Man, even getting outside of the typical pop radio format and playing Herbie Hancock's Watermelon Man. I was blown away. Here was a station playing my favorite songs in a drive that I'd made at least 60 times that I'd somehow never heard before in my life. The car ride began to seem fun now. I was even sort of enjoying it. It was so weird I had never found this before. Maybe it was a new station. Maybe this area finally decided to update and get with the times. Either way, I couldn't complain. I was hearing music that I loved, and that was rare even for the radio in the town that I lived in. Maybe it was a college station that just wasn't active very often. These questions suddenly came to a halt when I heard the radio DJ speak again. Hey there, listener, it's time for your last song, so tell us what you want to hear and we'll make it happen. He said it in the same typical cheesy morning zoo radio DJ voice. There was a silence, and after a few seconds, hello, what song do you want to hear? You only have one left. You better make it a good one, he said in the same tone of voice. There was a moment of silence again. Yeah, you. Pick one final song. Just say it and we'll play it, the DJ said in a more stern tone of voice. It was like he was speaking directly to me, waiting for an answer. What he said next confirmed it. Yeah, you in the silver Corolla. It's time for you to pick your last song. Now pick one, time's ticking. I was floored. How the fuck did he know what I was driving? That I was even listening? Maybe this was some elaborate prank? Caller, song, now, the DJ said in the most serious tone of voice yet. All I could mutter out was, hello? And a half second later, I heard my own voice coming through the radio. I was mortified. I didn't know what to do, so I just kept driving. It was at this point I noticed the van. It was a giant green Grand Caravan with tinted windows. I didn't know how long it had been following me. I honestly hadn't noticed it before. It was just something I didn't pay any mind to until I saw the hood, and the hood read 92.1 The Vibe
19.
in big bubble letters. I was terrified. I had to get the fuck away from that van. It looks like we don't have anything under the name, hello, listener, but I think we can find a way to meet in the middle with the Little Beatles. Here's Hello Goodbye for your last song, the DJ said in his typical fashion. Suddenly the song came over the radio. I was sweating bullets. I didn't know what to do, but I did know the band was getting closer with every second and every verse of the song. I was speeding as fast as I could at this point, doing nearly 70 down this windy back road, but it didn't matter. No matter how far away I got, they would end up right behind me. Suddenly the song ended and was replaced by what I could only describe as chase music you hear in a spy movie. It was making me even more scared than I was before. As at this point they turned on their high beams. They were getting closer and closer, trying to blind me with their high beams, but I just sped up as much as I could. I'd get a distance away, then they would catch up and try to ram the back of my car. I'd narrowly get away and then they'd try again,
19.
all the while the chase music played in the background. I was scared for my fucking life. I had no idea what they planned on doing once they had me stopped, but I didn't want to find out. I suddenly realized where I was on the road and hatched a plan. I knew that about a mile down there was an old dirt road that led to a small town. Once I got to the town, I could go to the 24/7 gas station, and it'd be a safe and public place where I could just call the police. I just had to hold them off for another minute or so. When I came up to the dirt road, I made a hard turn. I don't think the occupants of the van were counting on my sudden right handed turn. When they tried to make it to catch me, they were just a second too late. I watched from the rear view as they smacked the 70-mile-an-hour van into a giant oak tree, and the driver was ejected. I didn't see much of him, and all I can remember to this day was that he was wearing a purple ski mask. I wasted no time, and I drove the fuck home as fast as I could. I got inside, I locked the doors, and I didn't move an inch until daylight hit, and I knew I couldn't sleep. The
19.
next few weeks after were hard for me. I was a nervous mess. I could hardly eat. I was barely sleeping, and was more or less terrified to be in the car or listen to the radio. As the weeks turned into months, I began to relax and go about my life as normal. Slowly but surely, the trauma from the whole event had left me, and I was able to live my life as it never happened within 4 months of it. I never told anyone the story, and I don't think they'd believe it. Also, I saw no point of digging into the trauma after the event had already happened. I only tell it now because today, when I started my car for work and hit the seek button, I heard something that made me fear for my life yet again. You're listening to 92.1 The Vibe. We play what you want to hear. Holidays are about tradition. It sounds cheesy, but we all know it's true. For Christmas, there's the tree and the mistletoe, presents and gingerbread men. Thanksgiving has turkey and pumpkin pie. Easter has bunnies and eggs for some god awful reason. Those are the big ones, the ones that everyone knows. But families, communities have their own traditions too. Isn't that right? Take my family, for instance. We had this special plastic horn that we'd blow into every Christmas Eve to celebrate the coming holiday. It was always the first decoration to hang on the tree, strung up with green yarn. Maybe that tradition comes from somewhere else, but I don't think so. I've never met another person who does it. My town has its own tradition for Halloween as well. If you want to understand it, first you have to know about the Old Ed, our town's claim to fame. It's a terribly long story, but I'll make it quick. Back in the 50s, Old Ed lived out in the Bensnap woods all by himself. He was a quiet fellow, kept to himself, didn't seem to care much for other people, which worked out all right because the other people didn't seem to care for him either. In fact, there were some people in town who really didn't like Old Ed. Nobody can remember why, but one Halloween night, a group of men went out to his house and they beat him within an inch of his life. But before they could kill him, he escaped, ran out of the house and down the dirt road to the edge of the woods. The men who had beat him were too afraid to go after him, thought they might get caught if he didn't attract any attention, so they ran too, all the way back to town. But old Ed just kept staggering down that road, dragging himself forward first on his feet, then on his hands and knees, calling for somebody to help him. No one was near that night, so nobody heard. Some local farmers found him the next morning a mile down the road, stiff and stark. There was an investigation, of course, but the police decided that he'd been beat and chased down by some drifters. That's always who they blame it on when bad things happen, anyways. Everybody known who had done it. Nobody alive today could tell you, though, because after that day, no one ever talked about it. But the rumors started going around town about the strange things that the men had found in old Ed's house: black candles, strange sigils painted on the wall, obscene drawings pasted all over the floor. Not long after old Ed was put in the ground, the house was burnt down, and that was the end of that. But every Halloween, they say that if you go out to that road he died on, Old Ed's Road, they call it, of course, you'll hear him calling for help, cursing the names of the men who killed him, vowing revenge on them and their descendants. And that's why you never go out to Old Ed's Road on Halloween night. Now, it's hard to tell for certain how much of it's true and what's speculation. It's verifiable fact that he was an outcast and he was killed near the town about 70 years ago. I myself believe it was members of this very town who killed him. But the part about the things in his house, the house burning down, rumors probably built up over the years of retelling the town history. Still makes for a good story, though, and by extension, a good dare. That brings us back to tradition. What's my town's tradition? Well, every year, kids dare each other to go out to Old Ed's Road. Anyone foolish enough to take the dare, and there have been many over the years, start at mile marker 17 and walks down the road in the dark. No flashlight, no company, just you and the stars, and whatever else is lurking on the road that night. And you keep going until you hit mile marker 18, and then you're safe. The important part is to remember never look behind you. You have to walk the whole way and never, not once, turn back. Some kids walk it just fine, reaching the end laughing about how stupid it was, walking down the road in the dark and expecting something to happen. Others show up at the end, white as a ghost, shaking and telling tales about a soft whisper, or a dragging sound, or a wheezing, hacking breath dogging them the whole way down. I only know of a few people who look back. One was Emily Thompson. She would have graduated with my older sister, but a few weeks after Halloween one year she drove off a bridge. They say she fell asleep at the wheel. My sister says she turned around walking down Old Ed's Road and came out the other side a different person. Wouldn't tell anybody what she saw. Hardly spoke a word after that. And then old Ed cursed her for looking at him, and that's why she died. As for me, I think she just killed herself, but we'll never know, I guess. Another one was Brom Engelkiss, 20 years ago already. He went down the road drunk one Halloween. When he got to the end, he was screaming about seeing old Ed, right up until he kneeled over and died on the spot. The doctor said it was alcohol poisoning. I don't know about you, but I've never seen alcohol poisoning quite like that. There have been a few other reports here and there, not so many in recent years. Since I've become a teenager, it's gotten less popular. This Halloween tradition of ours, it's fading away like so many others. It's been years since someone turned around, and in the last few years, nobody's taken the challenge at all. Not that I've heard of, anyways. I guess that's why I decided to try it this year. I was 17 and trying to convince my friends that we weren't too old for Halloween. It's always been my favorite holiday. The one day a year I get to be someone, anyone else. That never gets old for me. The others weren't so sure. We gathered at my house to watch horror movies in the basement. We, being Kate, Eleanor, Ethan, and I. But by 10 o'clock, we were bored to death and ready to go looking for some trouble. It was Ethan who brought it up. Have any of you ever gone out to Old Edge Road on Halloween night? Katie snorted. Why would I waste my time? It's all bullshit, anyways. I've never done it. I don't mess with that kind of stuff, said Eleanor. I always wanted to go when I was a kid, but now that I'm an adult, I shrugged. Seems kind of silly, I guess. Come on, Bella, you're into all that spooky shit. You're telling me you never gone out to see if the stories are true? Asked Ethan. Have you ever been out there? I shot back. No, but I'd go. If you wanted to, that is. Katie groaned. Can we literally do anything else, please? What's the matter? Chicken? I asked. She threw a pillow at me. You two have the dumbest ideas, she muttered. Ethan stood up and jingled his car keys. Come on, he said. Let's go, I'll drive us. Eleanor looked pained. Seriously? You want us to drive in the middle of nowhere just to walk down an old gravel road? You got a better idea? Millions. Well, let's hear 'em. I'm in, I interrupted, standing up and grabbing my coat. Anything's better than listening to you all bitch and moan. With a little coaxing, we finally got Katie and Eleanor to agree to go. We all hopped in Ethan's car and drove off into the night. The radio cranked to the local station playing cheesy Halloween music. By the time we hit mile marker 17, everyone was back in high spirits. Katie didn't even roll her eyes when Ethan parked the car and turned around to look at us. So who's going? Not it, said Katie. Can't we all go? Asked Eleanor. Nope, said Ethan, popping the P like he always did. It can only be one person, and I drove us here, so I figure I'm exempt. You're all a bunch of cowards, I said, rolling my eyes and throwing the passenger side door open. I'll go. Meet me at mile 18. Don't turn around, called Eleanor as I slammed the door. Even though I put on a show of annoyance, I was actually really excited. I wasn't lying when I said I'd always wanted to try walking Old Ed's Road as a kid. I've always been kind of a thrill seeker, a natural skeptic, always looking for proof of life's little mysteries. As I took my first step onto the road, I asked myself, why didn't I do this before? The gravel crunched under my feet as I walked, my path well lit by the moon. It was cool out, but comfortable enough. It was almost nice, with only the sound of rustling grass and nearby owls to keep me company. It was also a little disappointing, anticlimactic for me just to walk down the road and see nothing. Maybe that's a real reason I never wanted to walk down Old Ed's Road. I didn't want to prove the stories false, take the magic out of the town's only urban legend. These thoughts kept me occupied for the first quarter mile. Then something in the air seemed to shift. I could feel the change, although I couldn't sense from where it stemmed. I cocked my head to the side as I stopped to listen. There was a sound, soft, barely there, but I could just hear it, but I couldn't figure out what it was. So I shrugged it off, probably an animal in the ditch, and kept walking. I started whistling to myself to shake off the shivers that were clawing up and down my spine. Here I go scaring myself. This must be how the story gets passed on. It's easy to convince yourself of anything on a night like this. A little further down the road, a sharp sound brought me to a halt. I quit my whistling and listened again. Silence. Complete and utter silence. No wind whipping in the tree branches. No crickets chirping. This was wrong. I swallowed hard, suddenly struggling to breathe. A sick feeling sat in my stomach. This was real fear, not the kind you get from watching stupid slasher flicks. It was a terrible, icy feeling that screamed, you're in danger and there's nothing that you can do about it. I started to walk again, picking up the pace a little bit. This time I heard it clearly. There was something dragging through the gravel behind me. It was loud, louder than it had been before. Whatever it was, I couldn't have been more than 10 feet in front of it. I started walking as quickly as possible, but the thing kept pace right along with me. By the time I had reached half a mile, I could hear its rasping, panting breath behind me. I could swear it was trying to form words. I stopped again. I'm not quite sure why. I guess I just couldn't bear to keep walking as though nothing was wrong. I stood there, stuck, still trembling from head to toe. I shoved my hands into my pockets to grip my phone. I wanted desperately to turn it on and use the flashlight so I could see around me, but I couldn't. It was in the rules: no flashlights, no company, no turning back. I opened my mouth and forced the words out of my numb lips. Who's there? As if in response, I heard the thing behind me drag in a wet, rasping breath. I took another step. I heard it drag itself along behind me. I asked another question. What do you want? Total silence. And then, help me. I broke into a sprint. The dragging noise followed me, never further than a few feet behind. I screamed for my friends, anybody to come and help me. My screams somehow weren't loud enough to drown out the gasping moans behind me. Matthew Jacobs. Damn Matthew Jacobs. I was past 3/4 of a mile. I was so close. Just a little further, and I'd be safe. Just a little more. Suddenly, I was struck with a terrible, near irresistible urge to turn around. Look back. It's okay. Don't you want to see what's back there? Don't you want to know for sure? What if someone's playing a trick on you? Or worse, what if it's not? Look, just a peek. No one will know. Nothing bad will happen. I caught myself already starting to turn my head, just barely managing to pull back and face forward. I clamped my hands over my ears to drown out the whispering voice in my head, tempting me with the answers to the questions I had always kept secret. My foot caught on something, a rock lightly, and I pitched forward, my hands barely coming out to catch my fall. I landed hard, skidding on the gravel, feeling it cut the palm of my hand. My body, acting on instinct, was still scrabbling forward, crawling desperately through the gravel. I was so close, just a little bit more and I'd be safe. I could see Ethan's headlight in the distance. If I could just. I felt something cold close around my ankle, gripping so hard I was sure I'd never shake it off. I screamed once more and shot to my feet, tearing off towards mile marker 18. The hand, or whatever it was, fell away with ease. I barreled right into Ethan as I crossed the line, my breath coming out in great heaving sobs. Everyone was talking all at once. What happened? Are you okay? We heard screaming and you're bleeding. Did you see it? Did you turn around? I heard him, I gasped. He was behind me the whole way. Bella, you need to breathe. Calm down. Easy does it. Slow down your breathing. But I wasn't listening to Ethan anymore, even as he steered me towards the car, the other girls casting wary glances back at the road. What did you see? Asked Katie, as soon as we were all inside, driving away from whatever the hell was on Old Edge Road that night. Nothing, I said, squeezing my eyes shut and keeping them that way. I didn't see a thing. Word travels fast in small towns. By November 2nd, there wasn't a person in town who didn't know that I had gone out to Old Ed's Road. Some people tried to ask me about it. I didn't answer their questions, wasn't interested in reliving the experience. None of my friends asked about it, thank God. They seemed to understand that whatever happened to me on the road that night was between me and whatever else was out there. This year I'm planning on staying far away from Old Edge Road. In fact, I think I may well lock myself in my room just to be certain I'm safe, because that night left me with the question that I haven't been able to forget no matter how hard I try. Why was the thing on that road cursing my great grandfather's name?